this Gemara in Yevamos Daf Sadi Test. All learning should bring in incredible schashidduch for Yisrael Chaim Devar Tamar Tibu Zerach Shalom Lebizava. I think when Tali Shem Ben Chai is also Chashuv Shleim Shmoyes when read the Shema Tadi Lo Nafsal Tzun Nachlas Chavas Yiva. So Bluma Bas Minta Chaim Moshe Shum and Malka Chavlei Basardina. Besaich Shar Chali Yisrael. We're holding on the bottom of Sadi Ches Amid base, and we're on the second to last narrow line, which the Gemara now is going to delve a bit deeper into the din of the Mishnah. The basic din of the Mishnah was, what do we do when we're not sure if people are brothers, who their mother is? The simple case, as we spoke about, is 5 women, they all give birth at the same time, and their sons got mixed up. So the basic fact that they don't know who their mother is somewhat fine to start off life, the regular kosher yidden. The problem is, what happens later on in life? There are other siblings to these 5 women, other children. So if later on in life, these boys are nifter without sons, and there's a potential yibum, who could do yibum? No one could do yibum. Why not? Because we don't know who the brother is. And the Mishnah spoke out the basic pretense that each one does chalitza, and the 5th one is going to come along and do yibum. There's going to be 4 chalitzas and 4 yibumin, for the potential that maybe one of them got the right one, maybe there is a yibum. So says the Gemara further 2 lines from the white lines, Miksasan, some put in the gear, Satan Rabbanan, Miksasan Achen, Miksasan Shein Achen. If we have a case when some are brothers and some are not brothers, the Gemara will explain. The brothers do chalitza. V'she'ein achin in the first white line miyabim. My kamar says Gemara, what is the case? Amar Rav Savra Achi kamar miksas and achin mina av umiksas and achin mina aim. And we remind yourself that the din of yibum, the pretense of yibum that we've been discussing for the last 97 days, is the brother from the father, a paternal brother. So says the Gemara 3 lines in the bottom, if we have miksas and achin min ha'im, umiksas and achin min ha'av, so achin min ha'im do chalitza, because they can't do yibum. V'achin min ha'av miyabim. And continues the Braisa. What do we do if some of them miksas and kayanim, miksas and shein kayanim? Some are kayanim and some are not. Kayanim v'choltzim, v'shein kayanim miyabim. Because a kohen cannot potentially do yibum for the fact that he might end up marrying a chalutza. Miksas a kohen, miksas an achem minoim. Elu chaltzim l'miyamim. They all do chalitza, and none of them are allowed to do yibum. As we turn over to today's daf of Sadi Tes, now we continue again with similar cases that happens when everyone gets confused. So Tanu Rabbanan yesh chayleitz li'imai. Misafik. There is a case when someone is going to do chalitza to his own mother. This brings us back similar to the brain teasers we had a few days ago. Cases in which interesting familial relationships, interesting here it's going to be because of a suffix when everyone gets mixed up, causes interesting outcomes. So says the Gemara, there are potential cases that one might do chalitza to his own mother, and la'achoisai misafik, and as well to his sister misafik, and l'bitai misafik to his daughter. Ketzad. What is the case? Says the Gemara. We have a woman, his mother, and another woman, and what happens? Ulahen shnei zecharim, and they have 2 boys, and then those ulahen shnei zecharim. They have 2 boys, meaning we have Rachel, we have Leah. Rachel and Leah have 2 sons. Everything so far is normal. But then Rachel and Leah are pregnant again, and they both go to the same hospital. Back then it was called a cave, and they both give birth to another 2 boys. But this time the 2 sons became mixed up. So we have the first 2 sons that we know who they are. Now we have 2 other sons that are mixed up. Then those 2 sons get married later on in life, and they die without children. And the son of Rachel comes and marries Leah, the mother of the other son. Now what happens? The son of Leah marries Rachel. What happens? And then they die without any children. So because of the suffix, each of the remaining sons has to chalitza to both of them. So what do we have? It's over here. Nimsa kol echad v'echad chayleis le'imay misafik. Again, the marriages were allowed. That's the chiddush. The marriages were allowed over here because basically Rachel's son married Leah. Leah's son married Rachel. That was perfectly fine. But the problem is that the other brothers, we don't know who they are. So then when these two boys die and Rachel and Leah fall to Yibam, they're ostensibly falling to Yibam, potentially to their own children, because we don't know. And that's the reason why it's going to come out that each one's going to be doing chalitza, of course, not Yibam, to their own mother. Now the Brisa continues 8 lines down. Not chayse misafik. A similar case that we're going to have chalitza to the sisters misafik. What's the case now? Similarly, Ketzan. The same case with girls. They have 2 girls b'machva in a cave. And then the brothers and not from that mother come. Vinasum, and the brothers not from that mother come and marry the girls. The brothers from the father, who are not related to these girls, come and marry these girls. Umesu beloi banim. And they die without children. So what happens? Chalitz l'shtein, the remaining ones have to do chalitza. So chalitz l'chayse comes out to do chalitza to the potential sister misafik. Similarly, bita misafik gates at ish toiv, isha acheres. And of course, in all these cases, you just really have to draw out the case and play it out in order to see how it all fits together. So Ishtav Isha Acheres, we have a woman and another woman. Sheyaldu Shtina Kavas B'machva. Again, they go to the local hospital called the cave, and they give birth to 2 girls. Ubo Acheim and the brothers V'nasam and marry them. Umeisu B'loi Banim Zacholis Labita Misavik Zacholis Labita Misavik. It comes out that each one ends up having to chalitza to his own daughter Misafik. Continues the Gemara in the similar vein. Tanya, we learned in our Brisa. We're 15 lines down. The first one in line is Chaylitz. Says the Gemara, there's some times that a father and mother can give birth to 5 umais. Umais meaning yochsin. Umais meaning different genealogies, different relationships, as we'll see in a moment. Ketzad Yisrael shalakach eved v'shivcha minashak. We have a good old-fashioned Jew that he buys a slave and a slave woman, boy and girl, from the marketplace. Ulahem shnei banim, and they had 2 sons that came with them. So these 2 sons are slaves. V'niskayer echad mehem, and one of the sons became a ger, beautiful. V'nimsu echad ger v'echad akum. So what happens? There were 2 boys. Again, we have a slave and a slave woman with 2 sons. One becomes a ger. So one's a ger and one's a guy. Hitbilon l'shem avdos. What happens next? Then we take the boy that became a ger and he goes into the mikvah l'shem avdos. Incorrect. Hitbilon b'shem avdos, the hitbilon in the plural. So what happens? The owner goes and takes the eved and takes the shivcha and puts them into the mikvah to make them his own avodim. Again, let's just play out the case. I'm sorry, I made a mistake. I go to the shuk, I go to the marketplace, and I buy an eved and a shivcha, boy and girl slaves, and they have 2 children. One child becomes a yid, one does not. So one's a guy and one's a yid. I take the slave and the shivcha, the eved and the shivcha, and they go into the mikvah to become eved ivris, slave of a Jew. What happens next? And then the slave and the shivcha have relations, they're together, and they have another son. So there's 3 children now. Harikan ger, V'akum, ve'eved. So one of the 3 kids, one's a ger, the one that was megayer. One's a guy, the one that was born to this eved and shivcha before I bought them. And one is an eved, the one that gave birth now. Shichra shivcha. Now we're going to take myself out of the story. What happens? And now this owner goes and is mishachrer the shivcha, frees the shivcha. Uba aleha ha'eved. And then the eved is together with her after she is a free woman. And they have another son, which is obviously not allowed. Now what do we have? Harikan ger, va'akum ve'eved. Those 3 we know. What's the latest? Is a mamzer. Because we have a yid being together with an eved. Shechur shneim. What happens next? He frees the other one. The eved now is free. V'siyon zelazeh. And now they marry each other and have another son. Harikan ger. Va'akum ve'eved u'mamzer v'Yisrael. So we have that one person can have 5 different levels of children. This couple managed to nail it all. They originally had a kid who became a ger. They had a kid who's a guy. They had a kid who's an Evid when they were Avadim. They had a kid who's a mamzer when they had illicit relations. And finally, when they were full-fledged Yidden, they had a kid that was a Yisrael. Gishmak. Says the Gemara, what's the Chiddush? Akam Evid Abba Bas Yisrael Avlan Mamzer. The Chiddush was the child number 3. That after we freed one of them, they still were together. That's an Akad and Eved. The Chiddush was that the kid is the status of a mamzer. And finally, we conclude the first part of today's shir with Tanu Rabbanan. We're about 8 lines from the Mishnah that says, the Gemara quoting a Braisa. There could be a case when someone sells his own father, interesting, in order that his own mother could get her ksuba. What's the case? Yisrael lokach eved v'shivcha min hashok. A Yisrael buys an eved and a shivcha from the marketplace. And then they have a kid. V'shivcha a shivcha, and he frees the shivcha v'nasa. And after freeing the shivcha, what does he do? He goes and gets married to her. And then he goes and writes over all his possessions to her son. So he marries the Shivcha, who is now a Yid, because she's freed, and then he gives all his properties to her son. Then the husband dies, and now the woman wants her ksuba. So what happens? Nimsa so the kid has to sell his father in order to collect the ksuba for his mother. Michael Mashman, what's the chiddush? Kulera Mary v'avda metaltli. You know what the chiddush is? That an eved has the din of metaltlin. Umetaltli mishtabdi liksuba v'baisema kamashlan avda kimikakoi dami. A second way of learning then doesn't have to be Rameir. So that's part A of today's shir. Different relations, different potential children, and how it all could pay out. And now we continue with similar scenarios in which the children became confused at birth. Beginning a lengthy Mishnah on the bottom of Sadites Amud Aleph. Ha'isha sheniz arev v'lada bivlad kalasa. We have a woman whose child became confused with her daughter-in-law's child. A woman and her daughter-in-law both give birth at the same time, a fairly, not common, but could happens occurrence. Young oldest child and first child, and the children became mixed up, as we've been seeing in the previous Mishnayos. They grew up. But now let's just before we even go into the deen, let's understand what's happening. In the previous case, it was 5 unrelated children. They got mixed up. And the question was, in the next stage of life, were there brothers involved? Here, as you could realize, a little bit more of a situation, because it's someone and their daughter-in-law's children that got mixed up, so those kids should have been related at some level, and now we don't know who they are. So what happens? Says the Gemara, they grew up, they got married, so they died, and we don't know who they were. So B'nei HaKala, the kids of the Kala, Choltz V'Laviyamim. Why? Why are they not allowed to do Yibam? Because we're not sure. It's a suffix, it might be the brother's wife, which you're allowed to do. But it's a suffix, then it might be the father's brother's wife, who's also. So because of that, they have to do chalitza. B'nei HaZikena. But what do we do with the sons of the Zikena, the elderly woman? Why? Because why? Because it's a suffix, it might be the brother's wife, or it might be the brother's son's wife, which are both mutter. So therefore, the Zikena's kids, if they want, are allowed to do Yibam. Continues the Mishnah with a similar scenario. Meisu Akshirim. 5 lines to the end of the Amid. What happens if the other kids die? Not the kids that got confused. This mother and this daughter-in-law has other children who we know who their mothers are. And they're nifter. So now the mixture, the son that we do not know who they are, does as follows. The kids of the elderly woman, the B'nei HaZikuna, Choltz V'Lamiyam, Shu Safik Ishes Achiv, Ishes Achiv, L'B'nei HaKalach, and Choltz V'Lamiyam. Continues the Mishnah, new case. Koyehenesh and his Arvu V'Lad V'Lad Shivchasa. We have a Koyanis. We have a wonderful Koyan and Koyanis that are married and have a child. But at the same time that she has a child, you know what happens? Her own Shivcha, her own slave woman, as well has a child. And again, the kids get mixed up. So we're not sure. Are these kids a Koyan or a Shivcha? One obviously being Kasha Likuna and everything with it, and one not. Says the Mishnah, Re'elu Oichlen Be'chuma V'cholgin Chilik Echad B'granais. They're both allowed to eat Shuma for the simple reason that one feeds his slave, one feeds his Shivcha shivcha truma, so this shivcha's kids as well get truma, and they're allowed to take a portion in the granary. Continues the Mishnah as we turn over to Sadi Tesam and Beis. Ve'enon metam in the mason, meaning they have a din of a koyin, and they're not allowed to be metame lemason. Ve'enon nasin nashim bin akshiris. And they're not allowed to get married neither to women who are kosher nor to women who are pasul, because we're not sure if they are a koyin or a shivcha. So they can't marry a regular Yisrael because they might be a shivcha, but they can't marry a shivcha. Why? Because they might be a koyin. So they have a bit of a problem over here. Hegdilu is continuing this case. Now these kids grow up. We have these kids that either a koyin or a shivcha grow up. And what happens? They free each other. Now, they're allowed to marry women who are rahi for kahuna, and cause a shivcha that is mishachrer, that is freed, is allowed to marry a kain or a woman who's fit lakuna. Excuse me. Ve'ena metam lemason ve'nitmu, and if they do become tamei, einan seifkin arbayim. They do not get malchus, which of course is an interesting din. Usually, a kohen who becomes tamei willfully does get malchus, but in our case, you can't get malchus bivadai. Why? Because each kid could always say, "I'm not the kohen." So meaning we have like an interesting dichotomy happening over here. Once they get freed, we're allowing them to marry Takuna, because whichever way you look at it, either they're a Kayin or they're a Shivcha that's freed. But with regard to other dinim, with regard to getting Malkus, if they become Tameh, they can say, leave me alone, I'm not the Kayin. So we can't give them Malkus. Very interesting. But they can't eat Shuma anymore. Because again, because they maybe are a shivcha that became freed, and therefore they don't eat shuma. And if they eat shuma in masham keren v'chaimish, they do not have to pay the keren and the additional chaimish, which is the amount they have to pay for misusing truma. And they no longer can get a portion on the granary. If they sell truma, they get to keep the money. And they don't get a portion in the kachim, in the base of Mikdash. And we don't give them kachim. But we don't remove that which they have. Again, they're floating in the middle, floating between two worlds. And they're exempt from the Yisraelim, the Chaim, and the Kiva, which is the portions that the Kohen have to give away, because they can say, I'm a Kohen, I keep it. And either one that has a Bachar animal lets it graze until it gets a mum. Therefore they get the chumras of both. So an interesting two-part of the second part of this Mishnah, that before they become freed, they can't get married, but they can eat Shuma, because either they're what? The children of a Kohen or children of a Shivcha of a Kohen. So either way, with regard to their food, they can eat, they're fine, but they can't get married. If they then become a freed person, now with regard to marriage, they're better, because now they can get married. But with regard to other dinim, they're a little bit messed up, as we see, because we don't know if they're a kohen or not. So before we get to the second half of the Mishnah, first we go back to the first part of the Mishnah. And says the Gemara, Saditesam Abeis, Mesu HaKshirim. What the Mishnah said, that if the kshirim, if this is referring to the mother and the daughter-in-law that had other children, if those we know who their mother is are nifter. Says the Gemara, for the one who we don't know who they are, just because we don't know who their mother are, they're called pasul. Why are we using the words kosher and pasul? The Gemara is bothered with. Is that kosher or pasul? One's a kid of a mother, one's a kid of a daughter-in-law. There's like pasul about them. Amar Papa, you're right. That's not what the Mishnah meant. Ema umeisa havadayim. It just meant the vaday and the suffix. Continues the Gemara quoting the Mishnah. Levnei akala echad chalitz v'chulu. The daughter-in-law's son became confused with the other ones. They do chalitz, the other one does ibam. Says the Gemara, as we saw yesterday, davka michlat v'hader yevumi. Av yevumi v'reish aloi to kabagi b'yavama l'shuk, because then you're potentially marrying the yavama l'shuk. And now we go into part B of the Mishnah, Kayanish and Nizarev. Now we have a kohen that gets mixed together with their slave woman. We said the kids that could eat shuman even receive a portion on the gar in the granary. Chelek echad, they get one portion of shita, of course, because only one of them is a kohen. Ema chelek echad, meaning they have to come together to the granary to receive together. And if they don't come together, we don't let them receive. If they're there together, one of them for sure gets, so we let them receive. If not, not. Says the Gemara, Tanan Kaman Damrei Cholkin Chuma Leved. Our Mishnah is a raya according to the Mandamar that holds we do not give a portion of Chuma to a slave. Elim Kin Rabbi Imo, unless the master is with it, and the Mishnah is corroborating this point, because the Mishnah is proving that if this kid and this kid, one whose mother is a Shivcha, one whose mother is a Kayin, we don't know who they are, they come together, said the Gemara, then they get. So this fits with the Mandamar that says we only give the Eved if the master is with him. The Tani learned in a Braisa, Ein Cholkin Chuma Leved Elim Kin Rabbi Imo, Divrei Rabbi Yehuda, but Rav Yossi Yachol says Rav Yossi, no, you can even get if the master is not there. Why? Yachol sheyamer im kayin ani tenli b'shel atzmi be'eved kayin ani tenli b'shel Rabbi b'mekay Rabbi. So Rav Yossi argues, and Rav Yossi says, regardless, this kid gets, like we explained in the Mishnah. Regardless, either this kid says I'm a kayin, or he says my mother is a shivcha. Whether it's a kayin or a shivcha, this kid gets a portion. So says Rav Yossi, we don't have to know why we're giving him; he gets regardless. Rav Yehuda says no, we only give him if he shows up with his master. Rav Yossi disagrees. Continues the Gemara, what's the machlekes b'mekayim shel Rav Yehuda in the place Rav Yehuda ayamaylin mitzuma liyochsin? A famous concept. In the place of Rav Yehuda, if they would see someone receiving chuma, they would assume he's miyuchas, they would assume he's a kayin. So therefore, said Rav Yehuda, I'm not letting this kid take chuma unless we know who he is. But b'mekayim shel Rav Yossi lo ayamaylim mitzuma liyochsin. Therefore, the place of Rav Yossi, it's no big deal if you take chuma, as long as you're allowed to eat it. But there's no, the act of receiving the chuma doesn't do anything for you. Therefore, Rav Yossi says, regardless of way you cut the pie, this kid can take the chuma, even if his father's not with him, even if the master's not with him. Therefore, the Mishnah is clearly going with the Shita of Rabbi Yehuda. Tanya, we learned in a Braisa, continues the Gemara. Amar Rav Elazar Rav Tzaddik, miyamai lo ya'adati el eidos echad. My entire life, I said one eidos, and because of what I said, what happened? The eidos that I said is that they made a slave to Kahuna because of my words. Says the Gemara. You think that because of one person, because of Rav Elazar Rav Tzaddik's words, they made him into a kayin? Hashta behenter shadikim in a kashbaruch maybe tekala al yadam. Sadikim atulay kalshkin. Are you telling me that Rav Elazar Rav Tzaddik said something and that caused an evet to be thought of as a kayin? How could it be? We know the famous animal of Pinchas ben Yair. We know that even the animals of Sadikim don't err. And you're telling me that Rav Elazar Rav Tzaddik himself's words were misconstrued? Explains the Gemara, no. They wanted to make an evidence of kayin based on his words, but of course they did not, because of the kavod, because of the incredible siyata d'shmaya, we could call it, of the gadol. Explains the Gemara, what was the story? As we just saw, that he said something in the place of Rav Yossi, he gave edus in the place of Rav Yehuda. In the place of Rav Yossi, witnessing someone get truma was meaningless, as Rav Yossi explained. So he saw it there, and he said it over in the place of Rav Yehuda, and he didn't realize in the place of Rav Yehuda necessarily they take the word as gold, and that's how they almost misconstrued his word. That was the story of Elazar Rav Tzaddik. And now we continue about 10 lines to the bottom. The first one line is Ve'esid. Continues the Gemara. Different people who are not able to accept truma on the gara and the granary. Tanarab on it. Asarai cholem truma beis agranis. 10 different categories of people. We do not give truma to them in beis agranis. Veilu 8. Chayre shaita v'katan. Tomtum androgynous. The first 5, very simple. Ve'eved, ve'isha, ve'arel, one doesn't have a bris milah. Ve'atamei, ve'noisi isha shena, again it's like 10 different categories of people that do not get tshuva on the beis hagar and on the granary. Ve'kulan, but all of them, mishagrin lahem lebateihem, we send truma to their house. They're allowed to eat it. We just don't give it to them on the garain. Chutz mitame v'nois isha again it's like, except for one who is tame and one who marries a woman that's not proper for him. So explains the Gemara. 1 second. I understand that we don't give them truma. Why not? Because they don't have das. Tumtum androgynous nami. A tumtum androgynous as well. We do not give, and again, the reason being, let's just see when Rashi over here points out The last Rashi in the Amud, Vizilusa did Truma. To give Truma to someone without das is degrading to the Truma itself. Call that everyone should see. Tumton, I'm drinking this Nami as we turn over to tomorrow's Daf Kov. As well, we don't give them why? Because they're their own creation. And as well, Rashi says it's a zilzal to kachim. Dilmaasi, Evanami, Dilmaasi, last week a bit Truma liochsin. Maybe they'll think this Evan is miyuchas if he gets Truma. Arl vitame, one doesn't have a bris milah, one who's tamei, mishum demeasi. Because it's disgusting to the Truma, repulsive. No, you see, again, it's like mishum kenas, let's kenas. But explains the Gemara, there's one person we do not understand. Elaisha mai time aloi. But why a woman who's the wife of a Kayin is not allowed to take Truma on the Garain? And we'll conclude with this, says the Gemara 5 lines down. Two different ways, and we'll go a little bit further into this machlokes tomorrow and explaining the nafkamina. Mirza Hashem.